Occupied France, 1942. A German officer opens a crate intercepted at the border. Inside, dead rats, dozens of them. Something feels wrong. He picks one up. The weight is off. He cuts it open. Plastic explosives, a detonator, a time delay fuse. Within hours, every German military school in occupied Europe is on high alert. Factories are searched. Boiler rooms are inspected. Thousands of man-hours diverted to hunting an army of explosive rodents. Here's the twist. Those were the only explosive rats that ever existed. The first shipment. The only shipment. The British had just won a victory without firing a single shot. And tonight, we're examining one of the most brilliantly failed weapons in history. The explosive rat that succeeded by never exploding at all. May 1940. France has fallen. Belgium has fallen. Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. Winston Churchill faces an impossible situation. He can't invade occupied Europe, not yet. Traditional warfare isn't an option, but he refuses to surrender. In a meeting with military chiefs, Churchill issues an order that will change the nature of warfare. Set Europe ablaze. From this directive, the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, is born. Their mission? Sabotage, subversion, and secret operations behind enemy lines. Asymmetric warfare before the term even existed. But Churchill's order created a unique problem. How do you set Europe ablaze when you can't deploy troops? When every border is guarded? When Nazi informers are everywhere? The answer lies in a secret research facility north of London, Station 9, near Welwyn Garden City. This wasn't your typical military base. It was part laboratory, part workshop, part mad scientist's lair. Led by a man named Charles Fraser Smith, the real-life inspiration for James Bond's Q, Station 9 had one job: develop weapons that didn't look like weapons, explosives disguised as everyday objects. They created explosive coal, explosive soap, explosive wine bottles. If it existed in occupied Europe, Station 9 figured out how to make it explode. But in 1941, someone at Station 9 proposed something so absurd, so seemingly ridiculous, that it almost got laughed out of the room. What if they stuffed dead rats with explosives? Think about the logic. Factories have boilers. Boilers burn coal. Rats die near boilers all the time. It's warm. There's food nearby. When workers find dead rats, what do? They throw them in the furnace to dispose of them. Now imagine that rat is packed with plastic explosives and a time delay fuse. The worker tosses it in the boiler. Minutes later, explosion. The boiler ruptures. A high-pressure steam explosion follows. The factory shuts down for weeks. Production halts. And nobody knows it was sabotage, just an unfortunate boiler accident. The plan was approved. Operation Explosive Rat was greenlit. Station 9 contacted a supplier in London. They needed dead rats, about 100 of them. The cover story? Medical experiments, laboratory research, nothing unusual, just routine biological specimens. The rats arrived and the real work began. Picture the scene. SOE operatives, trained saboteurs and commandos, now performing the most unusual task of their careers. They had to become taxidermists. Each rat was carefully skinned, the internal organs removed. Then came the explosive, Nobel 808, also known as plastic explosive, or PE. About 1 to 2 ounces per rat, enough to rupture a boiler if positioned correctly. But the genius was in the detonator. They used something called a time pencil fuse, one of the SOE's most ingenious inventions. Here's how it worked. A thin copper wire held a spring-loaded striker in place. When you activated the fuse, a small vial of cupric chloride, a corrosive acid, would slowly eat through the wire. Once the wire broke, the striker would hit the detonator, triggering the explosive. The beauty? The time delay could be adjusted based on acid concentration and temperature. The fuses came color-coded, red for 30 minutes, blue for several hours, black for 24 hours. For the explosive rats, they used the fire-activated version. The heat from the boiler would trigger the fuse when the rat was thrown into the flames. The explosion would occur seconds later, after the furnace door was closed, after the worker had walked away. Perfect deniability. Perfect chaos. Each rat was carefully sewn back up, positioned to look naturally deceased. The craftsmanship had to be perfect. Any obvious tampering would expose the operation. Finally, the rats were packed into containers and prepared for shipment to occupied France. The plan was to distribute them to resistance fighters and SOE operatives who would plant them near German-controlled factories, train stations, and power plants. The targets were carefully chosen: locomotive maintenance facilities, where coal-fired engines were serviced, factory boiler rooms in industrial centers, anywhere the Germans relied on steam power. About 100 rats were prepared in that first shipment. If successful, thousands more would follow. The psychological impact alone would be devastating. Imagine German workers paranoid about every dead rat they encountered. The containers were sealed, the shipment prepared, and in late 1942, the explosive rats began their journey to occupied France. The shipment never made it. German border guards intercepted the container. Why they opened it remains unclear. Perhaps routine inspection, perhaps intelligence had leaked, perhaps just bad luck. But when they opened that crate and found dozens of dead rats, something triggered suspicion. The weight was wrong. The positioning was odd. They cut one open. What they discovered sent shockwaves through German military intelligence. This wasn't just a weapon. This was the entire new category of threat. If the British were weaponizing dead animals, what else had they weaponized? The German response was immediate and massive. The captured rats were sent to military schools throughout occupied Europe. Officers were trained to recognize them. Photographs were circulated. Diagrams were distributed. Every German soldier was warned, do not touch dead rats near boilers. Factory managers received orders to inspect their boiler rooms daily. Any dead rats found were to be treated as potential explosives. Bomb disposal teams were dispatched. Entire facilities were searched. Think about the resources this consumed. Thousands of man-hours. Expert personnel diverted from actual threats. Paranoia spreading through every German-controlled industrial site. And here's the beautiful irony. They were searching for weapons that didn't exist. That first shipment, the one the Germans intercepted, was the only shipment. The plan had been exposed immediately. The SOE abandoned the project. No other explosive rats were ever made or deployed. But the Germans didn't know that. They assumed the interception was just lucky timing, that thousands more explosive rats had already been distributed throughout occupied Europe. They couldn't risk ignoring the threat. Back in London, SOE analysts compiled reports on the German response. What they discovered amazed them. The Germans were conducting massive searches. Security protocols had been implemented factory-wide. Resources were being pulled from actual defense work to hunt for non-existent rat bombs. In one internal SOE memo, an analyst wrote what would become the operation's epitaph. The trouble caused to them was a much greater success to us than if the rats had actually been used. Think about that. The weapon failed completely, never caused a single explosion, never damaged a single boiler, and yet it succeeded beyond the wildest expectations. This was psychological warfare in its purest form. The threat was more powerful than the execution, the fear more damaging than the explosion. The explosive rat operation revealed something profound about asymmetric warfare. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy believes exists, not the one that actually works. Years later, when SOE records were declassified, historians would point to the explosive rats as one of the most cost-effective operations of the entire war. The British spent perhaps a few £100 purchasing rats and explosives. The Germans spent thousands of man-hours and diverted significant resources hunting for threats that weren't there. One of these original explosive rats possibly from the intercepted shipment, survives today. In 2017, it sold at a Bonhams auction for $1,875. It had belonged to a French SOE agent who escaped occupied France. Today, that rat sits in a private collection, a testament to one of the strangest and most successful failures in military history. The explosive rat represents something extraordinary in the history of warfare, a weapon that succeeded by failing. It never exploded, never damaged a factory, never disrupted a single German operation through actual sabotage. And yet it caused more chaos, consumed more enemy resources, and created more operational disruption than many weapons that actually worked. The SOE understood something that modern psychological warfare still relies on. Perception is reality. The threat doesn't have to be real if your enemy believes it is. The Germans couldn't afford to ignore the possibility of explosive rats. So they searched, they inspected, they diverted resources, they second-guessed every dead rodent near every boiler in occupied Europe, all because of 100 dead rats that never made it past the first checkpoint. Charles Fraser Smith and his team at Station 9 created something remarkable. Not just a weapon, but a psychological trap, a haunting, the ghost of explosive rats that never existed. And in doing so, they proved that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that kills. It's the one that terrifies without ever being used at all. This was the explosive rat, the weapon that won by losing,